In the French novella, The Little Prince, a small child loves a rose. He, the little prince, had watched the rose emerge from seed, selecting her colors with the greatest care and dressing quite deliberately, adjusting her petals one by one. The rose demands tender attentiveness. The prince waters her, keeps the caterpillars off, makes a screen and glass globe to protect her from the cold and the wind. Eventually, however, the little prince begins to suspect that the rose is manipulating him. Perhaps she is not so vulnerable to the wind and the cold as she would have him believe. He decides to leave his rose and explore elsewhere. In his travels, he discovers a rose garden. He's taken aback. The rose had told him that she was the only one of her kind in the entire universe. And here were 5,000 of them, all just alike, in just one garden. And he begins to weep for the ordinariness of his rose. And as he wept, a fox appeared. The prince, despite his sadness, calls out to the fox and asks him to play. The fox replies, "I can't play with you. I'm not yet tamed." The little prince asks, "What does tamed mean?" The fox responds, "It's something that's been too often neglected. It means to create ties. For me, you're only a little boy just like 100,000 other little boys. And I have no need of you, and you have no need of me either. For you, I'm only a fox like 100,000 other foxes. But if you tame me, we'll need each other. You'll be the only boy in the world for me, and I'll be the only fox in the world for you." The little prince says, "I'm beginning to understand. There's a flower. I think she tamed me." And the fox continues, "If you tame me, my life will be filled with sunshine. Look, you see the wheat fields over there? I don't eat bread. For me, wheat is of no use whatever. Wheat fields say nothing to me, which is sad. But you have the color of gold in your hair. So it will be wonderful once you have tamed me. The wheat, which is golden, will always remind me of you. And I'll love the sound of the wind in the wheat." The fox begs the little prince to tame him. And the little prince says, "I haven't much time. I have friends to find and so many things to learn." "The only things you learn are the things you tame," the fox says. People haven't time to learn anything. They buy things ready-made in stores, but since there are no stores where you can buy friends, people no longer have friends. If you want a friend, tame me." The little prince asks the fox how. "You have to be very patient," the fox responds. "First, you'll sit down a little ways from me over there in the grass. I'll watch you out of the corner of my eye, and you won't say anything. But day by day, you'll be able to sit a little closer." Slowly, day by day, the little prince tamed the fox. And when it was time for the little prince to leave, the fox begins to weep. And the little prince says, "It's your own fault. I never wanted to do you any harm, but you insisted that I tame you." "So do you get nothing out of it?" the little prince asks. "I get something," the fox says, "because of the color of wheat." When the fox sees the color of wheat, he will now be reminded of love and friendship that he had with the little prince, something wheat had never meant to him before. The fox encourages the little prince to go look at the roses again. And he looks at them anew, and he says, "You're not at all like my rose. You're nothing at all yet. No one has tamed you, and you haven't tamed anyone. You're the way my fox was. He was just a fox like 100,000 other foxes. But I've made him my friend, and now he's the only fox in all the world. You're lovely, but you're empty. One couldn't die for you." Of course, an ordinary passersby would think my rose looked just like you. But my rose, all on her own, is more important than all of you together, since she is the one that I have watered. She is the one that I have put under glass and protected. She is my rose. He returns to the fox to say goodbye, and the fox tells him, "One sees clearly only with the heart. What is essential is invisible to the eye. It's the time you spent on your rose that makes your rose so important." Who tamed whom here? The little prince says that the rose had tamed him, and the fox had begged the little prince to tame him. Taming is a word that's often associated with domination, but the fox defined it as to create ties. So was the taming perhaps mutual? In the beginning, when God created humanity, God said, "Let us make humans in our image according to our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and over the cattle and over all the wild animals of the earth and over every creeping thing that creeps upon the earth." There are so many beautiful ways to interpret this passage, but the most prevalent and pernicious way is to say that God created humanity to dominate the earth, or because we were created in God's image, just as God is Lord over us, we are meant to lord over creation, leading to rationalizing our attempted subjugation of the other than human world. This is projected then onto the political and social realm too. This passage was just one of many used by people of faith to justify the enslavement of persons of African descent, who appeal to Scripture to justify relationships of domination, of mastery, and servitude. Even though we know these images have been used to justify the creation of social and political hierarchies, the language of mastery and servitude still pervades our everyday imagination. It's even used to describe the life of faith and our relationship with God. It's only an image, we might say, our devotion to God cast in the image of slavery to God. But images have power, especially when we claim to have been created in God's image. And according to the theologian Willie Jennings, when we regard God as a slave master over us, those who would enslave others cast themselves in God's image. They appeal to divine mastery to cast themselves as human masters to subjugate others. So in our gospel reading for today, Jesus doesn't just flip this upside down, he rejects the binary entirely. "I do not call you servants any longer, but I call you friends." This is a profound shift in the relationship. It is not only the disciples' shift in status that has changed from servant to friend, but also Jesus' social status has changed now, from master to friend. This is a collapse of the power differential. All of a sudden, there is mutuality with God. But then Jesus says something that appears very contradictory. "You are my friends if you do what I command you." Do friends command each other? Isn't that what masters do? Can the power differential really be collapsed if one party is still doling out commandments to abide by? In one sense, we actually already do command God. Just a few minutes ago, we sang and we commanded the Spirit of the living God to fall afresh on us. We commanded God to melt me, mold me, fill me, and use me. These are demands that we make of God. But to more fully understand how it is possible for Jesus to be friends with us, let's return to the little prince. The fox asks the prince to tame him, a word that often implies a relationship of domination, one party mastering the other. But the fox defines tamed differently, to create ties. And those ties are built with time and with patience and attention and tender, loving care. "I'm beginning to understand," the little prince says. "There's a flower. I think she has tamed me." This is entirely counter to the way that we have often thought about subjugating the natural world. The rose had made many demands of the little prince. "Feed me, water me, shelter me, care for me." And he did so for the sake of cultivating beauty and relationship and love. But his relationship with the fox was slightly different. The fox commanded the little prince, "Tame me." And when the little prince asked how, the fox gave very specific instructions. "You have to sit a little ways away from me, and then day by day you'll be able to get a little closer." It was also a command. So the commands were all given in the name of deepening relationship and cultivating intimacy. And they too will lead to mutual flourishing and joy. Jesus gives his disciples only one commandment throughout the entire Gospel of John: to love one another as I have loved you. So Jesus' insistence on keeping the commandment does not come out of this authoritarian impulse. It's the opposite. We should not do anything and follow no command that does not build up our neighbors in love, ourselves in love, and the world in love. Jesus is not calling for obedience through relationships steeped in coercion. He says, abide in love so that my joy may be complete in you and your joy may be complete. Joy is our great end, the eschatological horizon we turn our faces towards. And that was why the little prince had left the rose in the first place. He felt no joy in caring for his rose anymore, and he began to wonder if his relationship with his rose had in fact been a relationship of coercion instead of love. But it's the time that he spent with his rose that made his rose so important. It was the intimacy and the cultivation of love and tenderness and joy that comes out of deeply knowing another being. And that intimacy teaches us to inhabit the world differently. We notice what we hadn't noticed before. We pay attention to what had been previously made invisible to the eye. When you are friends with someone in insecure housing or their tenants and you see the way their landlord is exploiting them, all of a sudden the way that you understand affordable housing begins to shift. When you love a river and have spent your time meandering along its banks, getting to know its twists and its turns, and then are forced to watch as it turns into the color of tomato soup because of sediment and pollutants from nearby construction, you begin noticing the impact of overdevelopment, and you are driven to start speaking out about it at City Council. When you are friends with someone returning from the justice system, you begin to see how all of these systems work together to work against people in poverty. Friendship with human and other than human beings alike teach us to inhabit the world differently, to see systems of oppression with new eyes. Witness is born out of that intimacy, because abiding in love and intimate friendship calls us then to demand a better world. Notice there that I say demand and not command. There's a subtle difference there, and it has to do with the power differential and the possibility of friendship. A command is made by those in power over those enslaved. In friendship, we abide by the commandment to love, and the fruit of that love is joy. A demand, on the other hand, is often made against systems and institutions, powers and principalities, and it often comes from people who feel otherwise entirely powerless, like they don't matter and that no one loves them. When people have been made to feel like they don't matter and they feel isolated and alone in their struggle to survive day to day and feel as though to raise their voice is to shout into the void, a demand feels like the only recourse available to them. But demands too can be steeped in love. Demands too can reflect the commandment to love each other as Jesus loved us. A demand is how people who feel powerless express their discontent. We see this happening, and this is not okay. We cannot abide in this culture of violence because we deserve to abide in love. Demands at protests and rallies and city council meetings come out of a longing to collapse the power differential and to build a world that's more suffused with love and joy. Even if the demands may seem like a laundry list, it's because the number of systems of oppression that we're trapped within feel insurmountable. Those demands come out of a place of hope and joy and longing for a more just world, where not just individuals, but an entire city can abide in love. I recently attended a panel on the history of housing inequality in Durham. One of the panelists, Councilmember Nate Baker, grew up in Durham and saw this pervasive sense of Durham perceiving itself as a place that no one wanted to be. They would say yes to any developer that wanted to come to Durham as if to say, we're not anything special, but maybe if you come, eventually we will be. Maybe one day we'll start to matter. And at the same time, there was a lack of agency among community members, as if the gentrification and displacement and exploitation beginning to rapidly take place was an unavoidable foregone conclusion. Perceiving this as a teenager, he had a t-shirt that said, "Durham, love yourself." Durham, love yourself. This is a kind of reworking of the commandment, perhaps writ large, from the individual to the city. It's a command that emerges out of paying deep attention to all that prevents Durham from being able to abide in love. It's a command that comes out of a sense of intimacy, witnessing a pervading sense of hopelessness and rejecting that outright. It's a command that reflects the truth that when the most vulnerable in Durham flourish, we all do. What would it look like for Durham to abide in love? What would it look like for a community to say, we too have power, and we will not accept any powers or principalities that would try to lord over us and strip us of our agency, because Durham deserves to be loved, and so do we. The demands we hear from vulnerable people in Durham make these demands because they know that they are deserving of dignity and agency. When the most vulnerable among us flourish, so too will Durham. For many, Durham is not just a city like 100,000 other cities. Durham is their rose because of the time and the attention and the tender, loving care that they have poured into making this city a more just home. Many have eyes to see the beauty of the city in a way that I still cannot perceive as a relative newcomer. And at the same time, many also have eyes to perceive the pain of Durham in a way that I can't. But this is my spiritual practice, getting proximate to unimaginable pain and beauty entangled together, and allowing it to transform me and transform us, cultivating intimacy that comes with rootedness, and proclaiming over and over and over again, Durham, love yourself.